It's always the big ask. When it comes to anything, public policy, sales deals, there's something called a big ask where you ask or demand more than you actually want. That way, when you walk it down, it sounds reasonable. So let's say I wanted $100 from you. If I ask you for $100, you're going to be like, no way. And then we negotiate down. So instead I say $200 and you go, whoa, that's way too much. I say, okay, fine. How about 150? No, we'll do 100. 100. Okay, you got me. Which brings me to these stories. Facebook and tech giants to target attacker manifestos, far-right militias in database. Well, they also mention that they're targeting the Proud Boys, basically going after recruitment materials. Whatever that means. Could just be statements opposing the establishment or extreme government authority. We have another story, however. These two very, very big stories just coming out now. PayPal to research blocking transactions that fund hate groups and extremists. What's a big ask in this regard? They don't want to ban extremists necessarily. I mean, they do. They want to ban you. They want to ban me. So they go for the big ask. They say, we're going to go after these groups. It's kind of a big ask because people say, oh, extremists, they're bad. Then they need only wait for the Anti-Defamation League, who is partnering with PayPal or the SPLC, to start labeling people extremists. Recently, the Southern Poverty Law Center called me a reactionary. I quite literally just had a video talking about my support for universal health care and many of my libertarian left-leaning positions. But sure, why? It's not about being a reactionary. It's about just using buzzwords to try and push you in the public sphere closer to the idea of an extremist. So that way, eventually, they can strip you of your income, take away your property, dehumanize you. And so I want to do something. I want to show you these stories, but I want to start this segment with a tweet from Mr. Jack Posobiec. The 10 stages of genocide, he tweets. Now, I actually have a more complete list, which is very different, we'll end with, but we'll start with this tweet from Jack so that we can assess this as we read the news. The first stage of genocide is the classification. People are divided into us and them. The second is symbolization. People are forced to identify themselves. The third, discrimination. People begin to face systematic discrimination. 4, dehumanization. People are equated with animals, vermin, or diseases. 5, organization. The government creates specific groups, police and military, to enforce the policies. 6 is polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against the group. 7, preparation. Official action to remove and relocate people. 8, persecution. The beginning of murders, theft of property, trial massacres. 9, extermination. Wholesale elimination of the group. It is extermination and not murder because the people are not considered human. And finally, denial. The government denies that it has committed any crime. Now, where are we on this list? Well, that's why Jack says assess. Many people have been sharing this, trying to make arguments for where we really are. I'm going to give you my position towards the end of the segment when I show a response from Mike Cernovich, as well as the Holocaust Museum's breakdown in greater depth of what these things mean. But I want you to consider these things as we move through these stories. The first, Facebook and tech giants to target attacker manifestos and far-right militias in database. Reuters reports a counter-terrorism organization formed by some of the biggest U.S. tech companies, including Facebook and Microsoft, is significantly expanding the types of extremist content shared between firms in a key database, aiming to crack down on material from white supremacists and far-right militias. Until now, the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism database had focused on videos and images from terror groups on a UN list, and so has largely consisted of content from Islamists, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, etc. Over the next few months, the group will add attacker manifestos, often shared by sympathizers after white supremacist violence, and other publications and links flagged by UN initiative Tech Against Terrorism. It will use lists from intel sharing groups Five Eyes. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Five Eyes Spy Club, I believe you've got Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, and the US, all sharing intel. They'll add URLs, PDFs from more groups, including the Proud Boys, the 3 Percenters, and neo-Nazis. The Proud Boys. I don't recall the Proud Boys engaging in any serious attacks. What have the Proud Boys done? The Proud Boys, in a sense, You could, I know, I want to be careful. So let me preface and let me explain real quick. You could liken in some ways to Antifa. Now, hold on before you freak out and say they're nothing alike. What I mean is they're a factional group that engages in protest. So, of course, they're very, very different when you break it down. But what I mean is the Proud Boys are not, there's two factions fighting in the street typically. You see a lot of Proud Boys, you see a lot of Antifa. Their core ideals are very different. The reason I say you can liken them in that sense is only because you often see them fighting each other. Other than that, not a whole lot. The Proud Boys are nationalist, masculist individuals, and they typically march peacefully, except when confronted by leftist organizations. Antifa, so in a sense, they're a reactionary. I don't know if reactionary is the right word necessarily, but perhaps a little bit, both in the figurative and the literal. And they're typically defensive, meaning when fights break out, then they attack. When someone confronts them and attacks them, they attack back. Antifa are overtly violent, antagonistic actors in this conflict. Okay, so again, I'm stressing you can liken them only in the sense that they're two factions that appear on the ground. That's what I mean. When we look at what's been happening in the streets throughout this country, it's usually like Proud Boys and affiliated groups and then Antifa. Antifa smashes and destroys and burns and kills. And, you can criticize, white supremacist violence in the far right. Sure, but that's not associated with the Proud Boys. Overwhelmingly, like the Proud Boys have had some individuals associated with, say, there was one guy who got kicked out who went on to be an organizer of Charlottesville. So I'm not going to say 100%. Now, we got to be fair. The Proud Boys should be criticized for a lot of reasons. But they're moving the goalposts. And that's why I say big ask. They start by saying it's extremist groups like ISIS. Now they're saying Proud Boys. Okay, what you need to understand is this is them bringing the war on terror home to a nationalist group. I'll put it this way. If you ignore the Proud Boys, do you know what they do? They'd march around and then they'd go to a bar, they'd drink some beers, and they would go home. That's it. But Antifa shows up and Antifa is antagonistic and then fights break out. This was convenient for Antifa. Why? Well, Antifa wants to engage in violence. They also need propaganda showing the Proud Boys to be violent. By starting the fights and then running away, they get their footage of the Proud Boys being violent towards them, and then the media publishes the narrative. Proud Boys, violent, etc. Now what's happened? The Proud Boys are being added to this list, but what about Antifa? What about Black Lives Matter? Oh, I'm sorry. Even though Black Lives Matter did engage in mass rioting across this country, which resulted in more than $2 billion in damage, and that was just the insurance cap, it could be way higher. They are a mainstream organization supported by all the major corporations. So you need to understand where this goes, which is why I brought up that tweet from Jack Posobiec, which we'll get to. They go on to mention the firms include Twitter, Google, YouTube. They'll share hashes, unique numerical representations of original pieces of content that have been removed from their services. Other platforms use these to identify the same content on their own sites in order to review or remove it. So basically, if there's a manifesto or post or image, meme, they can put a code that recognizes it, share the code multi-platform, and remove it from every platform. This is what the Biden admin was talking about when they said, if you break the rules on one account, a channel or network, you should be banned from all the other ones. This is where they're going. They say, well, the project helps to combat extremist content on mainstream platforms. Groups can still post violent images and rhetoric on many other sites and parts of the internet. The tech group wants to combat a wider range of threats, said GIF-CT's executive director Nicholas Rasmussen in an interview with Reuters. Anyone looking at the terror or extremist landscape has to appreciate that there are other parts that are demanding attention right now, Rasmussen said, citing the threats of far-right or racially motivated violent extremism. Now, let's slow down for a second. Yeah, those are bad things. Really, really bad. And we must condemn them and push back. But you need to understand they're going to start lumping in everybody with these groups. Show me where the Proud Boys went around and engaged in violent racist attacks. I mean, the chair of the Proud Boys is not a white man. But there you go. You see, that's how they play it. It's framing. They're allowed to get away with it. Rules for thee, but not for me. The next one is really fascinating. PayPal to research blocking transactions that fund hate groups. And they're partnering with the Anti-Defamation League to investigate how extremist and hate movements in the U.S. take advantage of financial platforms to fund their criminal activities. Well, hold on there a minute. That's not a bad thing. Stopping criminal activity, I agree with, to a certain degree. I don't think PayPal should be forced to fund or provide a service for anybody committing crimes. Okay, so if you're committing crimes, well, you get removed from these platforms. Sure. The concern is who controls what is a crime or isn't, and that's what we need to pay attention to. So here we are once again on the surface. The initial statement is we want to stop funding criminal activity. My actual response is, yeah, I agree. I don't like criminal activity either. There's a challenge, though. With mass surveillance and the monopolization of these spaces, PayPal owning the overwhelming majority of internet, transactions, you start running into very dangerous situations when they have the power to do this without any kind of oversight or public adjudication. So I'm not a big fan. How have we seen this manifest? People like Carl Benjamin, who is a liberalist British YouTuber and podcaster, who had his Patreon taken down for using a racial slur kind of poorly in my point of view, but to make a point. He wasn't disparaging people based on their race. He was telling specific individuals that the way they described minorities was the way they themselves act. He was actually being not racist, and he was opposing racism, but it was done poorly. Well, because of that, they used this as justification to delete his income, terminated overnight. This caused a big wave off of Patreon, but ultimately, Patreon's fine. I mean, they're making tons of money. They say, it will also look at network spread. So here's where we go. They say criminal activity. We say, okay, that was the big ask. The initiative will be led through the ADL Center on Extremism and will focus on uncovering and disrupting the financial flows supporting white supremacist and anti-government organizations. Hey, punk rock, you're out the window. It will also look at networks spreading and profiting from anti-Semitism. I think that's bad. Anti-Semitism is a really awful thing. Islamophobia, also not a fan. Racism, anti-immigrant, anti-black, anti-Hispanic, anti-Asian, bigotry. I don't like any of those things. I don't like racism. I don't like, anti-immigrant is where you get really, really interesting. Really interesting. That's a policy position. That's not a disparaging someone based on their demographic position. Now, YouTube says you can't disparage people based on their immigration status. Yeah. What that means is like, if there's someone who immigrates here, you can't call them a slur for having immigrated here. And there are some, I'm not going to say them. But when you say anti-immigrant, are you talking about criticizing people who choose to come here? Because I think America's a great place. And I think it's hilarious that the left is acting like America sucks when everybody wants to live here. So I'll put it this way. I love saying this too. I have substantially more respect for the illegal immigrants who have crossed the Rio Grande and are coming through the desert than I do for the leftists who make up BS lies about this country and accuse it of being all the worst things in the book. I still think it's wrong to enter the country illegally. You can like the country. I can respect your zeal and your support, in a sense, or your belief in the ideas. I'm not going to support the criminal activity because it hurts everybody. We need people to come through properly and by the law so that we can make sure everybody flourishes, so that we can make sure we're properly engaging in household management, also known in Greek as oikonomia, which also is the root word of economy. You see how that works? Household management, oikonomia. I think that's pronouncing it right. But anyway, you get the point. So I'm actually a huge fan of immigration. You know why? As I've said before, I think we should allow every single person in the world to immigrate to the United States legally through the process. I've had a lot of people say, Tim, you're wrong. That's bad. No. Hold on. I'm not saying you just open the doors and everyone. I'm saying everyone should have the opportunity to apply. And then based on what makes sense for proper household management, we allow people visas. That's it. That means that if our economy is in trouble, we slow down on the visas. And if our economy is flourishing and there's a massive demand for jobs, but nobody's working, then we can find more people to fill these jobs. And, it's all about proper management. There may be circumstances where we say, okay, we can't support any more people. And there can be circumstances where we say, come on in, doors open. Proper management means people from other countries, I'm talking about proper legal, who are driven, will come here and we'll reap the rewards of their hard work and dedication. I think that's fantastic. You look at Nigerian immigrants, for instance. They end up tremendously successful. These people say, I'm going to come to America and I'm going to make it work. And they do. It's absolutely amazing. The bigger question, though, is whether or not this will be used to get rid of anything perceived as being racist. Because, of course, the left is also changing those definitions. Which brings me now to that tweet from Jack Posobiec. You see how they're identifying ideologies they don't like? The 10 stages of genocide. Well, let me bring up what Mike Cernovich said about this. He says, we are here, and he's showing us just before 7 on the 10 stages of genocide. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Mike Cernovich says, we are here. 7, preparation. Preparation is defined as official action to remove and relocate people. Well, how can that be? You think we're really at the point where they're going to start taking people and relocating them? Well, Cernovich points out a few things. 1, he says 6 is polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against the group. And that's Pelosi's hearings, bans on alternative voices. It's exactly what we're seeing with PayPal and Facebook and the ADL. He mentions you have the formation of police. The government creates specific groups to police and to enforce the policies. That's right. The Capitol Police are expanding nationwide. You also have the dehumanization from 4, maggots. That's right. The left refers to Trump supporters or anyone outside the establishment as maggots, M-A-G-A-T-S, like MAGA TS, associating MAGA with being a fly larva of some sort. That's 4, 5, and 6. Yikes. Sounds to me like we may be just before 7. But I don't know how long it takes for 7 to come about, and that's where they start officially removing and relocating people. But I can tell you this. With the January 6th Commission, with what's happening on Facebook, what's happening with PayPal, yes, the maggots, they're going to go after them. Officially remove and relocate? I don't know. Look, we don't live in 100 years ago. There's different ways to deal with things, and certainly some people have learned from the past. Not enough, in my opinion. But the establishment elites have certainly learned that the easiest way to remove and relocate people isn't to lock them up in cages or send them off to camps or anything like that. It's to take away their ability to spend money, to isolate them. Instead of, you know what, I was going to give a farm analogy. Some farmers might understand this, but I'm not going to do that. Instead of taking a scissors and snipping the branch, what they'll do is they'll tie the branch off as tight as possible and then walk away. And then the branch can't get any support or nutrients and slowly just withers and then falls off and is no longer a part of your beautiful bush. So what do we really have? I don't think it's going to be the same as it was in the past if we do see any kind of extreme, like 10 stages of genocide. No, what I think is true is people are being dehumanized, absolutely. There's an organization of Capitol Police to go after the maggots, as the left calls them. And the government is putting out propaganda nonstop. Joe Biden said the Republican agenda is the greatest threat since the Civil War. That is horrifying that he said that. The next move is going to be to start removing people. But what does that mean? I don't think it's the same as we saw 100 years ago. I think it's going to be excising from society. You won't be able to participate. You won't be able to work. You won't be able to buy things. And then slowly, you and your ideas will cease to exist. A pruning, as it were. But I do have this. This is from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, the 10 stages of genocide. And to be fair, I think when you actually get into the greater context of what this list is, I can tell you this. We are nowhere near anything on this list. I don't think we're anywhere near this. I do think there's a potential for balkanization or some kind of civil conflict, civil war, whatever you want to call it. Certainly won't look like something from 150 years ago. But to say that we're near in any way genocide, I think is wrong. Okay, so with respect to those who have presented their criticisms or their personal opinions, according to the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, classification stage 1 is the differences between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them, which can be carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different. That is true and happening. Maggots, MAGA, all that stuff. 2, symbolization. This is a visual manifestation of hatred. Jews in Nazi Europe were forced to wear yellow stars to show that they were different. No one's being forced to wear MAGA hats. However, there is a push from the left about vaccinations. Still, even if we were talking about vaccinations, we're not at 2. We're close to 2. When it comes to 1, yeah, there's the vaxxed and the unvaxxed. There's anti-vaxxers and vax fanatics, or whatever people want to call them. But we're not even at forced symbolization. Discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. This is where we could get, I would say, in a certain respect, with the Trump versus, like, not the Trump, but the populist right versus the establishment. We have a little bit of this, but for the most part, some civil rights are being denied to people like from the January 6th riots. That's true. But this is still extremely isolated. So, is there discrimination? Yes. Symbolization? Not so much. They're not forcing people. So there's a little bit there, but it's not particularly strong. Although what's happening to the people, the defendants from January 6th, I think is horribly wrong, the way they're being treated. By all means, they should be punished and charged for their crimes. But the things we're hearing are horrifying. It doesn't amount to every Trump supporter or 75 million people, though there is an association between the people on January 6th and Trump supporters. So discrimination does exist, but it is limited. At the very least, I can say 1 has absolutely happened. 2, not so much. No one's being forced to manifest this, but symbolization does exist in what people are choosing to wear, either a pink hat or a red hat. Discrimination is starting to happen right now. Dehumanization. They say those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. Now you can see January 6th. Again, a little bit of this, absolutely. They're calling people maggots. They're putting them in solitary confinement. This will spread to anyone who opposes it. So these are not fully formed, mind you. They say 5, organization. Regimes often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of people, Capitol Police. 6, polarization. Propaganda begins to spread by hate groups. So we have, I guess, look, what you need to understand about Nazi Germany is that the organizations that were spreading these things were official, publicly recognized organizations of to the Nazis' prestige. Like, they looked at these organizations and didn't view them with the disdain we would, right? So when we hear about these hate groups in Germany, we say they're hate groups. They're awful. In the United States, there are formal groups that are pushing these narratives. They say preparations, perpetrators plan the genocide. I don't think anybody's talking about solutions or genocides or anything like that, though there are people laughing and calling for Darwinism. Persecution. There's nothing being, people aren't being snatched off the street for wearing MAGA hats, right? We're not there. 9, obviously not, and 10, obviously not. When you look at the simplified version from this graphic, it certainly seems like things are worse than they really are. When you look at the 10 stages, you can find some elements of them have been manifest, but for the most part, we are very far away. Now, don't think it can't happen here. It can. I don't know when or how or what to expect or anything like that. I don't know. But I can tell you, I look at this and I'm like, I certainly see the elements of the fissure forming, which could lead to something like a genocide. I'm not entirely convinced. Now, there's several different fields here. You've got vaxxed and unvaxxed, the others. You've got the maggots and, the left. But you also have, I mean, there's a lot of just different us versus them. And it's not limited to just political. There's religious elements. There's ideological elements. And then, of course, you have critical race theories, racial elements. You're a white supremacist or you're not. All of these are fledgling. And I think the internet is driving us insane. It doesn't mean we're anywhere near an actual extermination taking place. But who's to say it can't happen quickly? Who's to say these can't, with the seeds being planted and some elements existing, flourish and become full on within a matter of months? I think next year is going to get crazy with the midterms, really crazy. I think 2023 with the primaries will be absolutely insane. And I hope you are ready for, I don't know what's to come. But why would things slow down? I just don't see why they would. It's a roller coaster, man. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.